The straight razor glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights of Ridgewood Academy's chemistry lab as Damian Porter pressed its cold edge against Scarlett Walsh's platinum blonde hair. "You thought you could snitch on me?" he hissed, his breath reeking of privilege and cruelty. In less than 24 hours, this untouchable principal's son would be begging for mercy on the cold tile floor. But right now, 17-year-old Scarlett could only think about the blade inches from her jugular and wonder if standing up for what's right was worth dying for. Scarlett Walsh had arrived at Ridgewood Academy 6 weeks earlier, her second-hand uniform pressed with the kind of desperate care that screamed "scholarship kid" to anyone who bothered to look. At 5'4" with natural platinum blonde hair that fell past her shoulders, green eyes that seemed to see too much, and a slight frame that belied her inner strength, she stood out among the spray-tan daughters of New Jersey's elite like a ghost at a garden party. Her father worked double shifts at the Newark shipyard, while her mother cleaned houses in the very neighborhoods where her classmates lived. The scholarship was supposed to be Scarlett's ticket out, a chance to break the cycle of paycheck-to-paycheck survival that had defined the Walsh family for generations. Ridgewood Academy sprawled across 40 manicured acres in the heart of Morris County, its Gothic architecture and ivy-covered walls hiding secrets darker than any cemetery. Founded in 1923 by railroad barons who wanted their children educated away from the unwashed masses, the school had maintained its exclusivity through a careful balance of academic excellence and willful blindness. Tuition ran $75,000 a year, not including the suggested donations that kept certain students' infractions out of permanent records. The parking lot gleamed with Mercedes, BMWs, and the occasional Maserati chrome and steel reminder of the gulf between the haves and the have-nots. Damian Porter ruled Ridgewood like a medieval prince surveying his birthright. At 6'2" with carefully styled dark hair, designer clothes that cost more than Scarlett's family made in a month, and the kind of casual cruelty that only comes from never facing consequences, he moved through the halls with the confidence of someone who knew the rules didn't apply to him. His father, Principal Harrison Porter, had run the school for 15 years with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of academic prestige. Under his leadership, Ridgewood's college placement rates soared, while its incident reports mysteriously shrank. Everyone knew that crossing a Porter meant academic suicide or worse. Damian's crew consisted of Lucas Reed, whose congressman father had helped bury 3 DUI incidents before Lucas turned 18, and Noah Bennett, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune built on price-gouging insulin. Together, they formed an unholy trinity of privilege, dealing Adderall to stressed students, hosting parties where consent was negotiable, and maintaining their GPAs through a combination of expensive tutors and strategic intimidation. They operated with the brazen confidence of those who knew their safety net was woven from $100 bills and family connections. Scarlett's troubles began on a humid Thursday afternoon in late September. She'd stayed after school to use the library's computer. Ancient laptop had finally given up the ghost, and she couldn't afford repairs until her mother's next paycheck. The building was nearly empty, just the custodial staff and a few students finishing activities. She was heading to the bathroom when she heard voices coming from the abandoned music room. Its funding cut 3 years ago to build a new lacrosse field, $40 for regular, $60 for extended release. Damian's voice drifted through the cracked door. "And tell your boyfriend if he narcs again. I'll make sure his Yale recommendation letter mentions his little problem with academic honesty." Scarlett froze. She knew she should walk away. Pretend she hadn't heard anything. That's what smart scholarship kids did, kept their heads down, their grades up, and their mouths shut. But something about the casual cruelty in Damian's voice, the way he weaponized futures like playing cards, made her pull out her phone. She recorded 30 seconds of damning conversation before footsteps approached the door. Well, Damian's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, Lucas and Noah flanking him like particularly well-dressed gargoyles. If it isn't Walmart Barbie playing detective. Scarlett's hand tightened on her phone. "I was just Recording private conversations? Damien stepped closer, his cologne overwhelming in the narrow hallway. That's illegal. You know, invasion of privacy. My mother's a judge. She'd be very interested in pressing charges. He held out his hand. Phone. Now. No. The word escaped before Scarlett could stop it. Surprising them both, Damien's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I said no. Scarlett's voice grew stronger. What you're doing is wrong. Those kids need help. Not dealers. Lucas laughed. An ugly sound. Listen to Mother Teresa over here. Like you've never popped an Addy before a test. I haven't, Scarlett said quietly. Some of us actually study. The silence that followed was heavy with menace. Damien stepped so close she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. Could smell the mint gum failing to mask whatever he'd been sampling from his own supply. You have no idea who you're messing with, he said softly. I own this school. My father owns this school. One word from me, and your scholarship disappears. One call from him, and no decent college will touch you. Is your little moral stand worth throwing away your entire future? Scarlett thought of her parents, working themselves to the bone for her chance at something better. She thought of the kids she'd seen strung out in the bathrooms, anxiety eating them alive as they chased impossible standards with chemical assistance. She thought of all the times she'd watched injustice flourish because good people chose safety over righteousness. Yes, she said. It is. Damien's face darkened. Then you just signed your own death warrant. Trailer trash. And trust me, by the time I'm done with you, you'll be begging to go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of. The campaign began the next morning. Scarlett arrived at school to find her locker decorated with printed screenshots from her mother's cleaning service Facebook page, complete with mocking comments about knowing her place and, some people are just born to serve. Someone had superimposed her face onto pornographic images and posted them in the boys' bathrooms. Her textbooks mysteriously disappeared from her locker, forcing her to beg teachers for loaners. During chemistry class, someone accidentally knocked over a beaker of hydrochloric acid that just happened to splash across her notes. But Damien's favorite form of torture was more personal. He'd sidle up to her in the hallways when she was alone, running his fingers through her hair with possessive familiarity. Such pretty hair, he'd murmur. Shame if something happened to it. Accidents happen in chemistry lab. You know, Bunsen burners, chemical spills. Hair is so flammable. The first physical attempt came 2 weeks into the harassment. Scarlett was at her locker between classes when she felt the cold touch of metal against her neck. She spun around to find Lucas holding a pair of scissors. Damien and Noah blocking any escape route. Just a little trim? Damien said, conversationally. Nothing drastic. Call it a reminder about keeping your mouth shut. Scarlett's hand shot up, catching Lucas's wrist before the scissors could close on her hair. 3 years of self-defense classisher, father's non-negotiable requirement for his daughter kicked in. She twisted, sending Lucas stumbling backward into a bank of lockers with a satisfying crash. Touch me again, she said, voice steady. Despite her racing heart, and I'll break your wrist. Students had stopped to stare, phones already out. Damien's face flushed with rage and embarrassment. You're going to regret that, he snarled. Lucas's dad will have you arrested for assault, for defending myself against someone attacking me with scissors. Scarlett pulled out her own phone. Please, call him. I'm sure the police would love to hear about this. Oh, and Damien? I backed up that recording to 3 different cloud services. You might want to think about that before you threaten me again. She walked away on shaking legs, knowing she'd just escalated a war she couldn't afford to lose. Behind her, she heard Damien's voice, low and venomous. Get me the good scissors from the art room, and find out when she'll be alone. Scarlett started varying her routes, never staying after school, always keeping to populated areas. She documented everything, every threat, every accident, every moment of harassment. Ruby Martinez, a quiet girl from her AP history class, began walking with her between classes after witnessing the scissor incident. My cousin went through this last year, Ruby said quietly. Different school, Same story. Rich boys who think the rules don't apply. She ended up transferring. I'm not running, Scarlett said firmly. Someone has to stand up to them. Then you need to be smarter, Ruby said. My mom's a paralegal. She says documentation is everything. Videos, witnesses, paper trails. Make it so airtight that even Principal Porter can't sweep it under the rug. Miss Elena Vasquez, the Spanish teacher who'd arrived at Ridgewood the same year as Scarlett's scholarship, began keeping her classroom open during lunch. She never said anything directly, but her meaningful looks and the way she always happened to be in the hallway when Scarlett was walking alone spoke volumes. Not everyone at Ridgewood was complicit in the culture of silence. The escalation continued for 3 more weeks. Damien's creativity and psychological torture seemed limitless. He'd paid someone to hack Scarlett's email, sending messages to her teachers, claiming she was dropping their classes. He'd arranged for her lunch account to be mysteriously drained, leaving her hungry unless Ruby shared her food. During a fire drill, someone Scarlett couldn't prove who had cut a 6-inch chunk from her hair while she was pressed in the crowd. She'd evened it out herself in the bathroom, fighting back tears as platinum strands circled the drain. Through it all, Scarlett kept recording, kept documenting, kept refusing to break. She'd learned that Damien's drug operation was more extensive than she'd initially thought, involving not just Adderall but Xanax, Percocet, and even some cocaine for the truly wealthy students. He was careful, using burner phones and cryptocurrency, but his arrogance made him sloppy. He couldn't resist bragging, couldn't help but flaunt his power in small ways that Scarlett meticulously cataloged. The final confrontation was inevitable. Scarlett should have seen it coming when Damien's harassment suddenly stopped for 2 days. The calm before the storm, her father would have called it. She'd stayed late on Wednesday to finish a history paper, the library closing around her as the sun set over Ridgewood's manicured grounds. Ruby had offered to wait, but Scarlett had waved her off. The paper was due first period, and she only needed another hour. She was packing up her things when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Scarlett's heart began to pound as she heard footsteps in the stacks. Libraries closed? Damien's voice echoed off the walls. Just you and us? Trailer trash. No witnesses. No cameras. The power outage took care of those. Time to finish what we started. Scarlett ran. She burst out of the library and into the darkened hallway, her footsteps echoing off the polished floors. Behind her, she could hear them giving chase. 3 sets of designer shoes slapping against linoleum. She needed somewhere public, somewhere with people. But the building was empty. The teachers long gone. Even the custodial staff finished for the night. The chemistry lab door was open. Scarlett didn't think, just ducked inside and slammed it shut, her fingers fumbling for the lock. The bolt clicked home just as bodies crashed against the door from the other side. Open up. Damien's voice was sing-song, mocking. We just want to talk about your future at Ridgewood. Or should I say, your lack of one? Scarlett backed away from the door, her mind racing. The lab was dimly lit by emergency lighting and the faint glow from the chemical storage cabinet. She knew this room well. It was where she'd excelled despite the accidents and sabotage, where her intelligence couldn't be diminished by her socio-economic status. The door handle rattled. Then she heard the distinctive click of a key in the lock. Perks of being the principal's son, Damien said as the door swung open. Master key to every room in the building. He stepped inside, flanked by Lucas and Noah. In the red emergency lighting, their faces looked demonic, shadows dancing across entitled features. And in Damien's hand, catching the light like a promise of violence, was a straight razor. My grandfather's, he said conversationally, flicking it open with practiced ease. He was a barber, back when that meant something. Used to tell stories about keeping order in his shop, making sure everyone knew their place. He stepped closer, the blade gleaming. Figured it was appropriate, considering you need a lesson about yours. Scarlett's back hit the lab bench. Beakers and test tubes rattled at the impact. Her fingers found the edge of the table, gripping it for stability as her mind cataloged potential weapons. Broken glass would require getting too close. The emergency shower was too far, but the chemical storage cabinet, you know what your problem is, Scarlet? Damien continued, savoring her apparent helplessness. You think because you're smart, because you got some charity scholarship, that makes you equal to us. But intelligence without power is just trivia. And power? He gestured with the razor. Power is what happens when daddy owns the school. When money makes problems disappear. When the rules bend around you instead of breaking you. Must be nice, Scarlet said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Never having to earn anything. Never knowing if people respect you or just fear your last name. Lucas laughed. Who cares about respect when you have everything else? Someone who's never had it wouldn't understand. Scarlet shot back. She was inching sideways now, trying to put the lab bench between her and them. Tell me, Lucas, when's the last time someone was honest with you? When's the last time you achieved something that daddy's money didn't buy? Shut up, Noah growled, but she'd hit a nerve. She could see it in the way Lucas's jaw tightened. That's enough philosophy. Damien snapped. Hold her. They moved as a unit, Lucas and Noah flanking her while Damien approached with the razor. Scarlet's hand found a bottle of sodium hydroxide solution drain cleaner. Essentially, she gripped it behind her back. You know what? Damien said as he got closer. I've changed my mind. The hair is too easy. Too simple. I think we need something more permanent. Something that'll remind you every day that you challenged the wrong people. He was close enough now that she could see her terrified reflection in the blade. Close enough that his arrogance made him careless. Chemistry was always my best subject, Scarlet said quietly. Then she moved. The sodium hydroxide splashed across the floor in front of them, its caustic nature immediately apparent as their designer shoes began to smoke. Lucas jumped back with a yelp, crashing into a shelf of glassware. The cascade of breaking beakers created chaos. Chemicals mixing in ways that definitely violated safety protocols. My shoes, Noah screamed. They're $500. Scarlet didn't waste time, gloating. She grabbed a bottle of concentrated ammonia and held it high. You know what happens when this mixes with the chlorine compounds in that spilled bleach, right? Or weren't you paying attention during the safety lectures? Damien's face had gone pale. The razor wavered in his hand as the reality of the situation hit him. The lab was now a minefield of spilled chemicals, broken glass, and potential reactions. The ventilation system was off with the power, and already the air was getting thick with fumes. You're crazy, he breathed. No, Scarlet said, backing toward the door. I'm done being your victim. I'm done watching you destroy lives because daddy makes your problems disappear. And I'm done pretending that money makes you untouchable. She kept the ammonia bottle raised as she moved. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put down the razor. You're going to leave me alone permanently. And you're going to stop dealing drugs to desperate kids. Because if you don't, she gestured at the chemical chaos around them. This is nothing compared to what I can do with actual planning. You threatening us? Lucas demanded. Though he was pressed against the far wall, as far from the spilled chemicals as possible. I'm promising you, Scarlet said. I have enough evidence to bury your whole operation. Videos, audio recordings, transaction records. Did you really think using Venmo with cute emojis made you clever? One USB drive to the DEA, and your futures evaporate faster than acetone. My father Damien started. Your father is going down too. Scarlet interrupted. Every parent you've threatened, every incident he's covered up, every bribe he's taken, I have it all. 3 weeks of following paper trails, of talking to former students, of collecting the receipts. You were too arrogant to hide properly. The emergency lighting flickered, casting shifting shadows across their faces. In the distance, sirens wailed. Someone had noticed the power outage and called it in. You're bluffing, Damien said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Scarlet smiled, a sharp expression that held no humor. Room 307, the old music room where you do your deals. I installed a camera 3 weeks ago, battery-powered, motion-activated, uploading directly to the cloud. Every transaction, every threat, every moment of your empire is documented. The straight razor clattered to the floor as Damien's hand went slack. That's illegal. Recording without consent. Funny how you suddenly care about legality. Scarlett observed, but actually, New Jersey is a one-party consent state for recording in places where there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. An abandoned classroom in a public school? Your lawyer mommy should have taught you better. Sirens were getting closer. The spilled chemicals had created a visible fog that made them all cough. Noah was whimpering about his ruined shoes, while Lucas stared at the spreading puddles like they were lava. "What do you want?" Damien asked finally. "All bravado gone. Justice," Scarlett said simply. "But I'll settle for change. You're going to confess not to the police. Not yet. To your father. To the school board. You're going to admit what you've been doing and accept whatever consequences come. Real consequences. Not the slap on the wrist Daddy usually arranges. And if we don't?" Scarlett's smile widened. "Then tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the tri-state area gets a very interesting package. Principal's son runs drug ring, while father covers it up. Can you imagine the headlines? The federal investigation? The asset forfeiture when they find out Daddy's been taking bribes? Blue and red lights splash through the windows. The approaching sirens had reached the parking lot. In minutes, the building would be swarming with first responders. Choose," Scarlett said. "Confession and consequences. Or complete destruction. 10 seconds. She started counting down, each number falling like a hammer blow. At 3, Damien broke. "Fine," he screamed. "Fine. I'll confess. Just stop. Please." The word "please" from Damien Porter's lips was sweet as honey. Scarlett nodded, lowering the ammonia bottle just as firefighters burst through the door. The next hour was chaos. Hazmat teams evacuating the building, EMTs checking everyone for chemical exposure, police taking statements. Principal Porter arrived in his Mercedes, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and fear. As he surveyed the scene, Scarlett watched him pull Damien aside, watched their hushed, frantic conversation, watched the color drain from the principal's face as his son presumably told him everything. Scarlett gave her statement carefully, explaining that she'd been chased into the lab, that chemicals had been spilled in the struggle, that she'd defended herself when threatened with a weapon. She showed them the straight razor on the floor, pointed out the security footage that would confirm she'd been pursued. What happened after the power went out was harder to prove, but the 3 boys' presence in the lab after hours, the weapon, and the chemicals on their shoes painted a clear picture. As she finally left the building near midnight, escorted by a police officer to ensure her safety, her phone buzzed with an email from an unknown address. "You think you won tonight? But you have no idea how deep this goes? Damien Porter is small time compared to what Ridgewood is really hiding. If you want the truth, the real truth about this school, meet me in the auditorium tomorrow at midnight. Come alone. Trust no one, especially not the police. A friend who knows." Attached was a single photo. A group of men in expensive suits standing in what looked like Ridgewood's boardroom. She recognized Principal Porter, several board members, and her blood ran cold. Judges, politicians, and business leaders she'd seen on the news. At the center of the group, holding what was clearly a briefcase full of cash, was someone she never expected. Her hands shook as she stared at the image. Everything she'd uncovered about Damien was just the tip of the iceberg. Ridgewood Academy wasn't just enabling privileged bullies, it was something far darker, far more dangerous. The war she'd started wasn't over. It was just beginning. Scarlett Walsh stood in the shadows outside Ridgewood Academy at 11:45 p.m., every instinct screaming that this was a trap. The Gothic building loomed against the October sky like a monument to corruption, its windows dark except for a faint glow from the auditorium. She'd spent the entire day analyzing that photograph, identifying faces, connecting dots that formed a picture so disturbing she'd thrown up twice. Judges who'd dismissed cases against Ridgewood students, politicians who'd voted for education bills that benefited private schools. business leaders whose children had graduated despite expulsions from other institutions. All of them gathered in Ridgewood's boardroom with briefcases that clearly weren't full of textbooks. She'd told no one about the meeting. The emails warning, "Trust no one," especially not. The police echoed in her mind as she remembered Detective Morrison's odd behavior when taking her statement, how he'd seemed more interested in what evidence she'd gathered than in the actual assault. How he'd pressed her about whether she'd shared her recordings with anyone else. How Principal Porter had seemed relieved when she'd said no. The side door was unlocked. Just as the email had promised, Scarlett slipped inside. Her footsteps silent on the polished floors. She'd dressed in dark clothes. Her now shorter blonde hair tucked under a black beanie. In her pocket, her phone was set to record. A live stream ready to broadcast to her cloud storage at the touch of a button. If this went bad, at least there'd be evidence. The auditorium doors were propped open, spilling pale light into the hallway. Scarlett approached cautiously, every horror movie she'd ever seen flashing through her mind. But what she found inside wasn't to ambush it, was a single figure sitting in the front row, shoulders hunched with the weight of secrets. "Miss Vasquez," Scarlett breathed, recognizing the Spanish teacher who'd been quietly protecting her. Elena Vasquez turned, and Scarlett gasped. The young teacher's face was bruised, her left eye swollen shut, her usually perfect appearance disheveled and broken. "They found out I was helping you," Elena said quietly. Principal Porter had some of his friends explain why that was a bad idea. Scarlett rushed forward, rage burning in her chest. "We need to get you to a hospital." "No." Elena's voice was firm despite her injuries. "Not until you understand what you're really fighting." "Sit down, Scarlett. Let me tell you about Ridgewood Academy." Scarlett sat, her hands clenched into fists, as Elena began to speak. "Ridgewood isn't just a school," Elena said. "It's a finishing school for corruption, for 3 generations. It's been where the tri-state area's elite send their children, not just for education, but for integration into a network that controls everything from local zoning boards to federal judicial appointments." She pulled out a tablet, showing documents she'd been collecting for years. "It starts small, little favors. A parent needs a building permit expedited, so they donate to the school. Another parent's company gets a government contract after their generous contribution to the new science wing. But over time, it evolved into something darker." The documents showed a web of connections that made Scarlett's head spin. Shell companies funneling money through the school's various funds, board members who sat on the boards of companies that consistently won bids for school services at inflated prices. A pattern of students with serious criminal records being admitted after substantial donations, their victims' families either paid off or threatened into silence. "Damien's drug operation?" Elena continued. "That's just the latest iteration. 20 years ago, it was insider trading tips passed at lacrosse games. 30 years ago, it was draft deferments for Vietnam. The crimes change, but the pattern remains. Ridgewood produces graduates who believe they're above the law because they've been taught that laws are for poor people." "But why are you telling me this?" Scarlett asked. "Why risk everything?" Elena's good eye met hers. "Because I was you once. Scholarship kid, full of dreams, thinking I could change things from the inside. I became a teacher to make a difference. Instead, I became complicit through silence, watching kids like Damien destroy lives, while I kept my head down and my classroom door open." She touched her bruised face. "This woke me up. If they're willing to do this to a teacher, what will they do to you?" "So what do we do?" Scarlett demanded. "How do we stop them?" Elena smiled grimly. "We don't. You do. Because you have something I never hate, Vidance. They can't bury." She pulled out a flash drive. "Every document I've collected, every suspicious transaction, every cover-up, combined with what you have on Damien, it's enough to trigger a federal investigation, but you need to be smart about how you use it." Before Scarlett could respond, the auditorium doors slammed shut. The lights blazed on, revealing Principal Porter standing on the stage with 6 men in expensive suits, faces from the photograph, including Judge William Thornton and State Senator Marcus Webb. "Miss Vasquez, Principal Porter said coldly. I'm disappointed. We gave you a chance to reconsider your loyalties. The only thing I reconsidered, Elena said, standing despite her injuries, was how long I let you poison children with your corruption. Porter's attention turned to Scarlett. Miss Walsh, you've caused quite a stir. My son is currently in a psychiatric facility, convinced his life is over. 3 of our most generous donor families are threatening to pull funding. You've disrupted a system that's worked perfectly for decades. Worked perfectly? Scarlett stood, anger overcoming fear. For who? For the kids who can't afford Damien's prices and fail their classes? For the scholarship students who get driven out when they won't play along? For every victim your system silenced? Judge Thornton stepped forward. You're young, so let me explain how the world really works. Systems exist for a reason. Hierarchies maintain order. Some people are meant to lead, others to follow. Ridgewood simply acknowledges reality. Your reality? Scarlett shot back. Built on bribes and blackmail, built on relationships. Senator Webb corrected smoothly. Mutual benefit. Shared success. Your little recording of Damien means nothing compared to the weight of institutions. That's when Scarlett smiled. You think this is about Damien? Oh, you really don't know. Do you? She pulled out her phone, showing them the live stream notification. 12,000 viewers and climbing. Every word you've said. Broadcasting live. Hi, Mom. She waved at the camera. Hi, Dad. Hi, New Jersey. Meet the men who think your laws don't apply to them. The men's faces went white. Porter lunged for her phone, but Scarlett danced back. Too late. She laughed. Cloud storage. Multiple platforms. And oh, did I mention the FBI agent watching? Special Agent Chen, you can come out now. From the back of the auditorium, a woman in a federal agent's windbreaker emerged, followed by a full tactical team. Gentlemen, Agent Chen announced, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, bribery, and about 30 other charges we'll sort out downtown. The next minutes were beautiful chaos. Judge Thornton tried to invoke judicial immunity while being handcuffed. Senator Webb demanded to call his lawyer, then realized his lawyer was also being arrested. Principal Porter just stood there, his empire crumbling, staring at Scarlett with undisguised hatred. You destroyed everything, he hissed as agents led him away. No, Scarlett said quietly. You destroyed everything the day you decided some kids mattered more than others? I just showed everyone what you were doing in the dark. As the auditorium emptied of criminals, Agent Chen approached Scarlett and Elena. That was incredibly brave, Miss Walsh, and incredibly dangerous. You're lucky your teacher reached out to us when she did. Scarlett turned to Elena in surprise. The teacher smiled with her good eye. I said you needed to be smart about the evidence. Live streaming was brilliant, but backup never hurts. I've been working with the FBI for 2 weeks, ever since I realized how deep this went. But they beat you. Stage makeup? Elena admitted, touching her bruised face. Sorry for the deception, but we needed them confident, arrogant, needed them to admit things on camera they'd never say if they knew the feds were listening. Scarlett sank into a chair, overwhelmed. So it's over? The arrests are just beginning, Agent Chen said. Your evidence, combined with what we've gathered, will take down a network that's been poisoning education and politics in this state for decades. There'll be trials, testimony, probably witness protection if you want it. No, Scarlett said firmly. I'm not hiding. I'm not running. They tried to break me because I was poor, because I was different, because I wouldn't play their games. But I'm still here, and I'm going to testify to everything. The next months were a whirlwind. The Ridgewood scandal dominated headlines as arrest after arrest revealed the scope of corruption. 43 individuals were indicted, including 3 judges, 2 state senators, and business leaders whose combined net worth exceeded $10 billion. Damien Porter, faced with federal drug charges, flipped on everyone to get a reduced sentence, providing investigators with detailed records his father never knew he kept. Scarlett became the face of the investigation, testifying with calm precision about everything she'd witnessed and documented. Her live stream video went viral globally, inspiring similar investigations at elite schools across the country. The hashtag number Scarlett was right trended for weeks as more victims came forward with their own stories of institutional protection for the wealthy. Ridgewood Academy itself underwent a complete transformation. The entire board was replaced, with new policies implemented that included blind admissions based solely on merit, full financial transparency with regular public audits, a zero-tolerance policy for bullying that actually had teeth, mandatory ethics classes for all students, a whistleblower protection program named after Scarlett. Elena Vasquez was promoted to principal, becoming the youngest head in Ridgewood's history. Her first act was to establish a fund for scholarship students, ensuring they had the same resources as their wealthy peers. Her second was to hire Scarlett's father as head of security, with a mandate to treat every student equally regardless of their last name. Scarlett finished her senior year as valedictorian, her speech focusing on the power of standing up to systems that seem invincible. Harvard, Yale, and Princeton all offered her full scholarships, but she chose Columbia for its journalism program. She wanted to tell stories, to shine light in dark places, to ensure no one else suffered in silence because they thought they were powerless. Damian Porter served 18 months in juvenile detention, followed by 5 years of probation. His testimony helped convict his father, who received 25 years for racketeering and conspiracy. The last Scarlett heard. Damian was working at a community center in Newark, teaching kids about the dangers of drugs and the importance of accountability. He'd written her a letter, apologizing not just for what he'd done, but for who he'd been. She hadn't responded yet, but kept the letter. Maybe someday forgiveness would come. Maybe not. That was her choice to make. Lucas Reed's family lost everything when investigations revealed decades of financial crimes connected to Ridgewood's network. He ended up at public school, where he learned what it meant to be nobody special. The humility was hard-earned but transformative. He now worked part-time while attending community college, planning to become a public defender. Noah Bennett's pharmaceutical fortune evaporated in lawsuits and federal fines. His family moved to a modest apartment in the same neighborhood where Scarlett grew up. The first time she saw him bagging groceries at the local supermarket, he couldn't meet her eyes. But when she went through his line, he whispered, "Thank you." She wasn't sure what he was thanking her for, justice or mercy, but she nodded and meant it. Ruby Martinez, who'd stood by Scarlett when it was dangerous, became her best friend and eventual college roommate. She was studying law, inspired by watching the system finally work for someone who wasn't rich. "You showed me power isn't about money," Ruby told her. "It's about truth and the courage to speak it." The investigation rippled outward, touching dozens of schools and institutions. The Ridgewood model of corruption was exposed and dismantled across the tri-state area. Federal oversight was implemented for private schools receiving any public funding. Scholarship programs were strengthened with protection for economically disadvantaged students. But perhaps the most important change was in the culture. Students who'd been silent about abuse, bullying, and corruption found their voices. Teachers who'd been complicit through fear stood up to protect their students. Parents who'd bought their children's success discovered their kids were capable of earning it. The myth of untouchability for the wealthy and connected cracked, then shattered. On her last day at Ridgewood, Scarlett stood in the chemistry lab where she'd made her stand. The emergency lighting had been replaced, the chemical storage reorganized with better security. A plaque on the wall read, "In this room, Scarlett Walsh proved that courage plus chemistry equals change." Elena found her there, no longer playing the role of beaten teacher but standing tall as an educational reformer. "Any regrets?" she asked. Scarlett thought about the question seriously. The investigation had been traumatic. The threats before the arrests were terrifying. Testifying meant reliving moments she'd rather forget. Her family had needed protection for months. She'd lost the normal senior year experience while becoming a national symbol. "No," she said finally. "They gave me a choice: accept my place or fight for what's right. I chose to fight, and because I did, Every kid who comes after me won't have to make that choice. They can just learn. As they walked out together, Scarlet touched her shortened hair, now styled in a confident bob that had become her trademark. What started as vandalism had become a symbol of transformation. She'd entered Ridgewood as a scholarship kid, afraid of standing out. She was leaving as a young woman who'd brought down an empire of corruption with nothing but truth, courage, and a working knowledge of chemical reactions. Her phone buzzed with a message from her father. "Proud of you, kiddo. Mom's making your favorite dinner. Can't wait to hear about Columbia orientation." Another from Agent Chen. "Thornton just pled guilty. 20 years. Your testimony made the difference." And one from an unknown number that made her smile. "I'm a scholarship kid at Preston Academy. They're doing to us what Ridgewood did to you, but I've been recording everything. Because Scarlet was right. Thank you for showing us how to fight back." Scarlet typed back, "Document everything. Trust good people. Stand your ground. And remember, they're not untouchable. No one is. You've got this." As she walked through Ridgewood's gates for the last time, Scarlet didn't look back. She'd done what she came to do, gotten an education. It just wasn't the one anyone expected. She'd learned chemistry and calculus, literature and history. But more importantly, she'd learned that power isn't inherited or purchased. It's earned through courage, claimed through truth, and shared through justice. The girl who'd arrived in a second-hand uniform, afraid of standing out, was gone. In her place walked a young woman who'd faced down corruption with a bottle of sodium hydroxide and a smartphone, who'd turned privilege against itself, who'd proven that sometimes the best chemistry experiment is mixing truth with power and watching it explode. Ridgewood Academy would survive, transformed into something better. The networks of corruption would reconstitute elsewhere, because they always did. But now, there was a template, a proven method for fighting back. Now there were thousands of Scarlets in schools across the country, documenting and preparing, knowing they weren't alone. The war against systemic corruption wasn't one might never be truly won. But battles could be fought, and victories achieved. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. Scarlet Walsh had come to Ridgewood seeking education and opportunity. She left having provided both to countless others. Not bad for trailer trash with a chemistry set and a conscience. In the end, the blade that was meant to cut her down had only trimmed away her fear. What remained was sharper than any Resora mind that wouldn't be silenced. A spirit that wouldn't be broken. And a voice that spoke for everyone who'd been told to know their place. She'd found her place. All right. It was standing up, speaking out, and fighting back. And she'd teach anyone who'd listen how to find theirs too. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elena Vasquez, now Secretary of Education for New Jersey. "Watching your speech. The Ridgewood bill just passed federal oversight for all private schools. You did this." Scarlet smiled, remembering the teacher who'd risked everything to protect her. Elena's reforms had transformed educational policy across 3 states, implementing protections that made another Ridgewood impossible. The chemistry lab where Scarlet had made her stand was now the Elena Vasquez Center for Educational Ethics, training teachers to recognize and combat institutional corruption. "Questions?" Scarlet asked, and hands shot up across the auditorium. "Miss Walsh, do you ever regret going public? The death threats? The harassment, was it worth it?" Scarlet touched her hair unconsciously, remembering Damien's scissors, his straight razor, the moment she'd thought she might die for refusing to know her place. The harassment was real. For months, I couldn't go anywhere alone. My parents needed protection. We had to move twice. But regret? No, because every threatened kid who messages me, every corrupt network we expose, every bully who faces consequences, that's worth any price. What happened to Principal Porter? He's serving year 7 of his 25-year sentence. He teaches literacy to other inmates, now court-mandated community service. His son Damien actually visits him, trying to rebuild some kind of relationship. Redemption is possible, even for those who seem irredeemable, but it requires accepting responsibility first. Another hand, your investigation inspired the Educational Transparency Act. How does it feel to have federal legislation named after you? Scarlett laughed. They named it after the principal. Not me. But yes, requiring financial transparency from any school receiving public funds, that was our goal. No more dark money. No more buying silence. No more networks of corruption hiding behind educational privilege. Her phone lit up with another message. This one from Agent Chen, now Deputy Director of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. Another network down in Chicago. Used your playbook live streaming plus documentation. These kids learned from the best. The speech continued for another hour. But Scarlett's mind drifted to all the changes 5 years had brought. Her investigative series, American Corruption, Hidden Networks, had won a Pulitzer at age 22, making her the youngest recipient in that category. The book rights had paid off her parents' mortgage and funded scholarships for a dozen kids from her old neighborhood. Her father now ran a security consulting firm specializing in protecting whistleblowers. Her mother had gone back to school, becoming a social worker focused on educational advocacy. The family that had scraped by was now comfortable, but more importantly, they were safe. The networks that had threatened them were dismantled, their leaders imprisoned or disgraced. After the speech, Scarlett met Lucas at a coffee shop near campus. His transformation still astounded. Herthy, entitled Bully, was now one of the city's most dedicated public defenders. "I owe you an apology," Lucas said, the same words he opened with every time they met. "And a thank you. You've apologized enough," Scarlett replied. "Meaning it. And you've proven your change through action. That's what matters." "I put another bully away yesterday," he said quietly. "Rich kid terrorizing scholarship students at Dalton. Used your precedent live streaming as evidence." The judge cited Ridgewood v. Blank. Walsh. In allowing it, they sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd been on opposite sides of a war and somehow found peace. Lucas would never be a friend. Too much history for that, but he'd become something more important. Proof that people could change. That justice could transform, as well as punish. That evening, Scarlett returned to her apartment to find a package waiting. Inside was a chemistry textbook and a note. "Miss Walsh, I start teaching this fall at an inner-city school. Thank you for showing me that one person can make a difference. I promise to keep my door open for kids who need protection. A future educator inspired by you." She placed the textbook on her shelf next to her Pulitzer, her investigative awards, and a framed photo from her Ridgewood graduation. In the picture, she stood with Ruby and Elena, her short hair defiant, her smile genuine. They'd survived. More than that, they'd thrived. Her phone rang. The Washington Post, offering her a position as senior investigative correspondent focused on educational corruption. She'd take it. Of course, there were more networks to expose, more kids to protect, more bullies who thought their money made them untouchable. 5 years after a boy with a straight razor tried to cut her down to size, Scarlett Walsh had become everything they'd tried to prevent: powerful, influential, and unafraid. But unlike them, her power came from truth, her influence from courage, and her fearlessness from knowing she'd survived the worst they could do. The girl who'd entered Ridgewood Academy as a scholarship kid had become the woman who ensured no scholarship kid would suffer in silence again. Not a bad legacy for someone they'd called trash. Not bad at all.